So in this video, I'm going to show you how to take the results of the QC flow rate check forms, which included numeric values, and then take them from this sheet here that we downloaded in the previous video, and actually we could just save this as a connection. In one right click and then a refresh click, take it to this, which is a control chart. It can't be a pivot chart, remember, because those only are restricted to category variables. And as you can see from this chart here, there are irregular intervals between the QC checks, which is why an XY scatter chart is the safest kind of chart to use for irregularly interval data. All right, so how do we do this? How do we go from this, which, okay, good, but then we've got to do some of these calculations here. And how do we get that automatically into this? And we could see where we are in terms of any trends in our leak or flow rate or the other QC checks that we do. What we need to add are percent differences, right? We need to add calculated fields because what we're actually going to chart is the percentage off of the standard that we're really interested in. So we need to put in a calculated field for flow rate percent difference, and then we just calculate percent differences from the standard for temperature, and then the same thing for barometric pressure. And then the leak test results, we leave those alone because those are values that are produced, and we use those values in the control chart rather than any calculated fields. So one thing that we need to look at is where are we going, right? So we are going to this. So what we need to do is calculate the flow rate percent difference, and we need to calculate the 10% difference and the barometric percent differences, because those are what's actually charted. In this case, just the flow rate, because we have data there. And if you click on that series, you could see it highlights the data, which actually is super useful to figure out what you're doing. And then also you could drag these boxes around if you wanted to add a column, for example, although that's a little tricky. So let's focus on the calculated values that we need to put in. So starting from this, which is the table that we produced in the last video, let's see where we are. So I'm going to go to Data, Queries and Connections, and you could see that it added stuff here. So the only query we made is raw data, and that produces this table. But then when we had to pull in the most recent file from the folder and sort for only Excel files, it added these others, which if they're expanded, you can actually minimize and don't worry about those. The query that you named, that's called raw data or whatever you named it, that's what we're going to work from. So basically what we want to do is create a new query that pulls from this query. So to do that, we go to Data, Get Data, and we're going to choose a blank query. And now what we're going to do is reference this query here, raw data. And to do that, what you just type in is equals, and then pound, which is notifying Excel that we're going to refer to a query. And you could see, like Excel does, it suggests options when you start typing in an equal sign. We're either going to type in equals pound quote raw data close quote, or just select this and then press enter, and now it pulls up the results of that query, which is now the source of the next query we're writing, where we're going to have calculated fields. The first thing I'm going to do is just keep the columns that I want. So I want to keep ID because that's the index field. The start time and completion time is when people filled out the form. I don't need that, although it might be useful in the future. And all I need now, I'm going to keep, is the initials of the site operator. So I hold down the control key, the purpose of the site visit, the date of the site visit, and I just hold the control key down, and then all the rest of the fields I want, because I need to add percent difference calculations for flow rate, temperature and barometric pressure. And I also want to include the leak check results in my graph. That's an important parameter that I've been measuring. So now that I've selected the columns that I want, I go to Home, Remove Columns, Remove Other Columns, and now it added that step. So one thing that I want to make sure always is the data types are correct, and flow rate is in decimal. However, temperature and barometric pressure are whole numbers, integers, and we don't want to rule out in future if somebody wants to add a value that includes a decimal. So I'm going to change these to decimal numbers just by clicking in the header and changing it here, and then that won't limit somebody in the future from adding values that include a decimal. Okay, so now I need to add a calculated field for flow rate percent difference. So I'm going to click on Add Column, Custom Column, and now I'm going to put in this calculation for percent difference that I'm going to call flow rate percent diff. And the calculation is open parentheses, so it's the difference between your handheld standard and the standard in terms of flow rate. So flow rate indicated, and I double click and it just pops it over there. Type in minus flow rate of the standard, close parentheses, and that's the difference divided by flow rate of the standard, because we want our best estimate of the truth as a proportion of what we think the truth is, which in this case is our standard. So I say OK, and now it adds it all the way at the end, and I want to pull it over to right after the date of the site visit. This is one of the most important things I'll be plotting, and in general, it's easier to plot things when your columns that you're plotting are together. So I'm just going to hold this down and drag it over all the way. And now we've got date of the site visit and flow rate percent difference. But look at the data type here. It definitely needs to be a decimal number. So once we do that and we don't see any errors, we're good to go there. Now I'm going to add similar calculated fields for temperature and barometric pressure. So again, I go to Custom Column in the Add Column tab, and my name is temp percent diff, and the equation is open parentheses, and we're doing temperature now, so the temperature indicated on your instrument, your routine instrument, minus the temperature of the standard, close parentheses, divided by the temperature of the standard, because again, we want it as a proportion of what our best estimate of the truth is. Say OK. And now I'm going to move this to the left, again, all the way over. OK, and now we have one more calculated field to add, which is the barometric pressure percent difference. So add column, custom column, barometric pressure percent diff, and open parentheses, and we go down to, and you can see you can do calculations on calculations, because these columns that we added are now available here. Barometric pressure indicated minus barometric pressure standard, close parentheses, divided by barometric pressure standard. OK. And now we want to put that in an order that is consistent with our template chart. So we're trying to make things as easy as possible. Now, keep in mind, if you want to, you can change the names of these steps here. Like, for example, you could right-click this added column and say rename, and then you could say calc flow rate percent diff. And that way you would know what these steps are. So at this point, we're ready to send these to a table and then apply our template chart. So I'm going to say close and load, and I'd previously taken a break from this and saved it to a connection. So close and load only saves it to a connection. So here I right click and now I say load to, and now I'd like it to make a table. I'm going to say OK, and now we have a table with these calculated fields, and we want to generate this chart. So how do I do that? Well, first of all, I click and make sure that I'm in a table, and the table design tools pop up. And before we start, we need to fix the format here. And keep in mind that you want to wait until you get out into Excel to change the format. Don't change the format or truncate in Power Query. Wait until you get here, because actually Power Query truncates, doesn't round, so you'll actually lose potentially data that you might want to keep. So I'm going to format this by selecting the whole column and doing Control 1, or going to format in the ribbon. And this is flow rate percent difference. We're actually going to present it as a percentage with only one decimal. And we're going to apply this same format by, once we have a cell formatted the way we want and we click on it, right click, Format Painter, and I'm going to apply that same format to the temperature percent difference column, and that's right click and go to Format Painter, and the barometric pressure percent difference column. And our format of our leak test results is great, and you could see that these values are right aligned, which most of the time, unless you fooled with the alignment, means that these are numbers, which is what we want. So when we insert a chart, the easiest way to insert a chart is to select two contiguous columns where we've got the first column being the x-axis, which is what we want, and the y column, the second column, and that's what we want, flow rate percent difference. We're going to try this, and then we're going to add on a secondary axis the flow rate check results, because that's really important too. But with the columns selected that we want, go to Insert, and at this point we'd love to insert a pivot chart, but there's a big problem with pivot charts, which is that it treats all data on the x-axis, values, as categories instead of sequential continuous time. So we're going to insert an XY scatter chart. And when you select the drop down, you're given the option of more scatter charts. And here, since we selected scatter charts, it's offering us a little preview of what the data would look like. I'm actually going to go up to templates. I'm looking for my flow rate QC checks, so I'm going to select that template and say OK. And now it produces a chart, sort of what I'm looking for, with the flow rate percent difference on the y-axis and dates along the x-axis. Now, what's super important also are the leak check results, especially because they're not zero all the time and they seem to have some weird trends. So how do I get those in? The easiest way is to select the data you want, including the header, and it needs to be the same number of data points as are already charted. Select that, do Control C, go back to your chart, and click anywhere on it so that the whole chart is selected. Now right click and paste. And it pastes it in as a new series. Well, the leak test results are of a different unit than the flow rate percent difference. And so what happened when I added this is it squashed down the flow rate percent difference, which is like right around 1% or so. So really what I want is the leak check results to be plotted on a secondary axis so that we can make sense of it and actually read the flow rate percent differences down here. So the easiest way to change a chart is to make sure you have the chart selected, go to chart design, and then say change chart type. And what I want to select here is a combo chart, because when you've got different series with vastly different units, you usually need to use one plotted against this y-axis to the right. So I'm going to have flow rate be a line with markers because it's important to know that measurements weren't being made continuously along this point in time. They're just these dots, which are at irregular intervals. But I'm going to make the leak check results, I'm going to make those columns, and I'm going to click this secondary axis. And what that does is you could see that now the leak tests results are against this axis on the right side of the graph. But we can still read very well, and they're all less than 3%, the flow rate percent differences. So that looks okay. I'm going to say OK. And now you can do further modifications to this chart if you want to. But the most important thing for us to know is that we can automatically populate this chart and this table once we add new QC check results to the online QC check form, and then those get refreshed into the online table, and then we download it into our raw data folder. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to add a new QC check that was just done yesterday, and it has very poor leak results. We're going to see what it does to the chart. So I added a QC check result using my phone, pointing my phone at the QR code and entering the results, including the date of the visit and flow rate known by the standard and flow rate measured by your analyzer. And I downloaded that and copied it into my raw data folder. So now I'm going to just put my cursor anywhere in this table, right click, and say refresh, and watch to see if another row gets added here. So a row at the bottom, we can see the date of the site visit, and then also a new entry in the chart. So I'm going to say refresh, and yep, that's what it did. It added the check that I just downloaded and copied into the raw data file, and then it added this data point over here. Now there's more that we could do to customize the chart, including we can make a title for the chart, and we probably should identify these axes. So this axis here corresponds to the flow rate percent difference, whereas this axis over here corresponds to the liters per minute, which you can sort of see here, but we probably should add units. But that's it for this demonstration for how to get your data from online into a raw data folder and then automatically update something like this just by clicking refresh.